The envelope arrived at Hillary Clinton's Chappaqua residence on a Tuesday morning in late January 2025, unremarkable in every way except for the official seal embossed on its corner. Her assistant placed it on the breakfast table among the usual correspondence, campaign donation requests, speaking invitations, legal briefings. But this one was different. This one bore the seal of the United States Senate Intelligence Committee. Clinton's hand trembled slightly as she opened it. Not from fear she'd faced congressional committees before, survived them, emerged intact, but from something else. Recognition, perhaps. A sense that certain debts, no matter how long deferred, eventually come due. The letter was brief, formal, courteous in that particular Washington way that makes courtesy feel like a threat. The Senate Intelligence Committee requests your appearance to testify regarding matters of national security, foreign influence operations, and the handling of classified material during your tenure as Secretary of State. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard will lead the questioning. She read that last sentence 3 times. Tulsi Gabbard, the woman she'd called a Russian asset on national television. The congresswoman she tried to destroy with a single calculated accusation back in 2019. The veteran whose reputation she'd attempted to demolish because Gabbard had the audacity to challenge the foreign policy establishment Clinton represented. And now that woman sat atop America's intelligence apparatus with access to every classified document, every secret communication, every buried email that Clinton had spent years insisting didn't exist. Clinton set down her coffee. It had gone cold. Outside, snow fell softly on the New York countryside, peaceful and quiet. Inside, her mind raced through possibilities, calculating angles, weighing her options with the same ruthless precision that had carried her through decades of Washington combat. She'd been here before: the Whitewater hearings, the Monica Lewinsky scandal, the Benghazi investigations, the email server controversy. Each time she'd survived. Each time she'd outlasted her critics. Each time the political machinery that protected the powerful had kept her insulated from real consequences. But something felt different this time. Gabbard wasn't a Republican congressman looking to score political points. She wasn't a right-wing journalist or a conspiracy theorist. She was a decorated combat veteran, a former Democratic congresswoman, and now the director of national intelligence with the full weight of America's intelligence community behind her. And she had waited 5 years for this moment. Clinton's attorney called that afternoon. "Have you seen the subpoena?" His voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering bad news to a powerful client. "I've seen it. We need to discuss strategy. They're going broad, Hillary. Foreign influence, classified material, the foundation. This isn't a focused inquiry. This is comprehensive." Clinton stared out the window at the falling snow. "Who else is testifying?" "From what I understand, you're the primary witness." Gabbard has documents, she has emails, she has FBI reports. Her office has been preparing for months. "Of course she has." Clinton's laugh was bitter. "She's wanted this since I called her out in 2019. Her attorney was silent for a moment. Then, "Hillary, I need to ask, is there anything in those documents, anything at all, that we haven't discussed?" The question hung in the air. Clinton had faced it before from investigators, from journalists, from her own legal team. And every time she'd given the same answer: nothing that anyone can prove. But this time was different. This time, Tulsi Gabbard wasn't constrained by political considerations or media narratives. She had subpoena power, classification authority, and most dangerous of all, the moral conviction of someone who believed she was on the side of truth. "We'll prepare," Clinton said finally, "just like we always do." But even as she said it, she knew that preparation might not be enough. The Senate Intelligence Committee hearing room filled slowly on the morning of February 14, 2025. Valentine's Day, an ironic choice for what promised to be anything but a demonstration of love or affection. Reporters jostled for position. Camera crews set up their equipment with the practiced efficiency of people who knew they were about to witness history. The room itself was designed for moments like this: marble columns, dark wood paneling, the the kind of austere grandeur that Washington used to intimidate anyone who walked through its doors. The witness table sat alone in the center, positioned so that everyone in the gallery could see the person testifying, exposed and vulnerable under the weight of scrutiny. Hillary Clinton arrived precisely on time, flanked by 3 attorneys and a chief of staff who'd been with her through every scandal, every investigation, every near miss of the past 3 decades. She wore a dark blue pantsuit, understated but authoritative. Her expression was carefully neutral, a mask she'd perfected over years of public interrogation. But her eyes betrayed her. They moved constantly, assessing, calculating. She nodded to Senator Warner, the ranking Democrat who looked profoundly uncomfortable. She acknowledged Senator Cotton with the bare minimum of civility required. And then her gaze landed on the center chair, currently empty, waiting for the woman who would soon occupy it. "Director Gabbard will be here shortly," Senator Cotton announced. "Mrs. Clinton, please be seated." Clinton took her position at the witness table. Her attorneys arranged their files with meticulous care, creating barriers of paper between their client and what was coming. The chief of staff whispered something. Clinton nodded without really listening. And then the side door opened. Tulsi Gabbard entered with the bearing of someone who'd spent years in military service, posture perfect, movements economical, presence undeniable. She wore a dark suit, professional and unremarkable, but somehow she commanded the room in a way that expensive clothing and political pedigree never could. She carried a single leather portfolio, deceptively thin. Behind her, 2 junior staffers wheeled in 3 document carts stacked with folders, each one meticulously labeled and organized. The message was clear. This wasn't going to be a quick political theater. This was going to be thorough. Gabbard took her seat without looking at Clinton. She arranged her materials with the same precision she'd once used to check her weapons before a mission. Then, and only then, did she look up and make direct eye contact with the woman sitting across from her. The air between them crackled with tension. Every person in that room felt it, the weight of 5 years of animosity, the memory of public accusations, the prospect of long-delayed accountability. "Mrs. Clinton," Gabbard began, her voice calm and measured, "thank you for appearing before this committee. I want to begin by reminding you that you're under oath. Do you understand that any false statements made here today could constitute perjury?" "I understand." Clinton's voice was steady, controlled. She'd done this before. "Good." Gabbard opened her portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Then let's start at the beginning. October 17th, 2019. You appeared on the Campaign HQ podcast hosted by David Plouffe. During that appearance, you made the following statement, and I quote, "I'm not making any predictions, but I think they've got their eye on somebody who is currently in the Democratic primary and are grooming her to be the third-party candidate. She's the favorite of the Russians." She looked up from the document. When pressed by the host about who you meant, you clarified that you were referring to me. You called a sitting member of Congress, a major in the Army National Guard who had served in Iraq, a Russian asset. Do you remember making that statement? Clinton's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "I remember expressing concerns about Russian interference in our elections, which is a well-documented fact." "That's not what I asked, Mrs. Clinton." Gabbard's voice remained perfectly level. "I asked if you remember calling me, specifically me, a Russian asset on national television." The silence stretched. Clinton knew she was trapped. Deny it and they'd simply play the audio. Admit it, and she'd validated the entire basis for this hearing. "I expressed concerns about certain candidates," she said carefully. "You expressed concerns." Gabbard pulled out a printout of a tweet. 2 days later, on October 19th, a reporter asked your press secretary Nick Merrill to clarify whether you'd been referring to me. His response, posted on Twitter, was a single Russian word, "Ka-a-ka-a-ya." She looked at Clinton with something approaching contempt. "Your spokesperson responded to a question about whether you'd called an American veteran a traitor by tweeting in Russian, mocking me, making a joke out of accusing a United States Congresswoman of treason." Clinton remained silent. There was nothing she could say that wouldn't make it worse. "Let me tell you what happened after you made that accusation, Mrs. Clinton." Gabbard's voice took on an edge. Within 24 hours, every major media outlet had identified me as the target of your statement. CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post. They all ran stories about how Hillary Clinton had accused Tulsi Gabbard of being a Russian asset. She pulled out printouts of headlines, sliding them across the table. Clinton suggests Gabbard is being groomed by Russians. Tulsi Gabbard labeled Russian favorite by Clinton. Clinton, Russians have eye on Gabbard for third-party run. My campaign donations dropped by 40% in 1 week. Scheduled speaking engagements were canceled. Democratic Party officials who had been neutral suddenly refused to return my calls. You didn't just attack me, Mrs. Clinton. You tried to destroy my political career with a single calculated lie. Clinton leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she used when she felt threatened. Representative Gabbard, Director Gabbard, you had made statements that were concerning regarding Syria, regarding Assad, regarding Russian foreign policy. I was expressing legitimate concerns about. About what? Gabbard's interruption was surgical. About the fact that I opposed the regime change war you championed. About the fact that I questioned why we were supporting al-Qaeda-affiliated rebels in Syria. About the fact that I had the audacity to meet with Syrian civilians to understand what was actually happening on the ground instead of relying on CIA briefings. She pulled out another document. Let me read you something, Mrs. Clinton. This is from the Defense Intelligence Agency's 2012 assessment of Syria. It states, and I quote, "There is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, and this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want, in order to isolate the Syrian regime." Gabbard looked up. The supporting powers. That was us, Mrs. Clinton. That was your State Department. We were supporting the creation of what would eventually become ISIS because it served our goal of removing Assad. And when I pointed that out, when I questioned that insane policy, you called me a Russian asset. Clinton's face had gone pale. She glanced at her attorneys, but they had nothing to offer. This wasn't a legal argument. This was a moral indictment. So here's my first question, Mrs. Clinton, and I want you to answer it clearly for this committee and for the American people. Gabbard leaned forward, her eyes locked on Clinton's. When you called me a Russian asset in October 2019, did you have any intelligence, any at all, to support that accusation? The silence was absolute. Even the court reporters had stopped typing. I had concerns based on publicly available information. Clinton began. Yes or no, Mrs. Clinton? Did you have intelligence supporting your claim that I was a Russian asset? Clinton's hands gripped the edge of the table. I had concerns. That's not an answer. Gabbard's voice was steel. Let me help you. As Director of National Intelligence, I now have access to every intelligence assessment, every classified report, every source collection regarding foreign influence operations. I've personally reviewed 5 years of material specifically looking for any intelligence regarding myself and Russian connections. She paused, letting the anticipation build. There is nothing, not a single report, not one piece of intelligence, not even a suggestion from any credible source that I have had any improper contact with Russian officials, received any Russian funding, or coordinated with Russian interests in any way. The words landed like hammer blows. So when you called me a Russian asset, you weren't expressing concerns based on intelligence. You were lying. You were weaponizing your credibility as a former Secretary of State to destroy a political opponent who threatened your foreign policy legacy. Clinton's attorney finally spoke. Mr. Chairman, I object to this line of questioning. Director Gabbard is testifying and cross-examining simultaneously. Senator Cotton didn't hesitate. Overruled. Director Gabbard has provided documented evidence to this committee. Mrs. Clinton is here to respond. Continue, Director. Gabbard pulled out another stack of documents. But here's where it gets interesting, Mrs. Clinton. Your accusation didn't happen in a vacuum. Let me show you something. She slid an email across the table. This is from your political team, dated October 12, 2019, 5 days before your podcast appearance. The subject line is TG Strategy. She began reading. Need to move quickly on Tulsi Gabbard. Her Syria position is gaining traction with anti-war Democrats. Recommend coordinated media strategy to paint her as fringe dangerous. Russia angle polls best with primary voters. NBC and CNN contacts can run with this. State Department sources can provide background on Syria meetings. Gabbard looked up, her expression cold. This wasn't a spontaneous comment, Mrs. Clinton. This was a coordinated political operation. Your team developed a strategy to label me as a Russian operative, lined up media contacts to amplify the message, and even arranged for State Department sources, your former colleagues, to provide supposedly credible background for the smear. Clinton's face had gone from pale to flushed. Those emails are taken out of context. Context? Gabbard pulled out more emails. Here's another one, October 14th. HRC go on Tuesday. Talking points ready. Russia/Gabbard angle will dominate news cycle. DNC coordinated on messaging. She spread the emails across the table like a prosecutor laying out evidence of a crime. You planned it, Mrs. Clinton. You coordinated with the DNC. You lined up media contacts. You prepared talking points. And then you went on that podcast and delivered the accusation knowing exactly what would happen. Senator Warner shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Director Gabbard, while I appreciate the thoroughness of your documentation, I think we need to remember that opposition research is a standard part of political campaigns. Opposition research, Senator. Gabbard turned her gaze to Warner. Opposition research is finding out your opponent's voting record. It's documenting their public statements. It's investigating their financial disclosures. It is not coordinating with media outlets and former government officials to label a sitting member of Congress as a traitor. She turned back to Clinton. But you want to know the real reason you targeted me, Mrs. Clinton. It wasn't about Syria. It wasn't about Russia. It was about the 2019 debate. She pulled out a video still, showing the moment from the Democratic primary debate where Gabbard had confronted Kamala Harris about her record as California Attorney General. The image showed Harris's stricken expression, Gabbard's controlled intensity, the moment when Harris's presidential campaign effectively ended. July 31, 2019. I questioned Kamala Harris about her record on criminal justice, about the people she'd put in prison, about her opposition to marijuana legalization while people rotted in jail for possession. Within 48 hours, Harris's poll numbers collapsed. Her campaign never recovered. Gabbard leaned forward. And you knew, Mrs. Clinton, that anyone who could dismantle Harris with facts in a 2-minute exchange could do the same to you. So you decided to destroy me first. The Russia accusation wasn't about foreign policy. It was about eliminating a threat. Clinton's composure finally cracked. That is absolutely what? True. Gabbard's voice rose slightly for the first time. Let me tell you what I think happened, Mrs. Clinton. I think you saw me as a younger version of yourself, ambitious, willing to challenge the establishment, not afraid to go for the throat in a debate. And you couldn't allow that. She pulled out polling data. After my confrontation with Harris, I rose in the polls. Not dramatically, but enough to be noticed. Enough to qualify for the next debate. Enough to be a threat. And you have a long history, Mrs. Clinton, of dealing with threats preemptively. Senator Cotton interjected. Director Gabbard, can you tell the committee what impact Secretary Clinton's accusation had on your campaign? Gabbard's expression hardened. Within 1 week of her statement, I lost 40% of my small-dollar donors. Major Democratic fundraisers who had been considering supporting me withdrew. Media coverage shifted from my policy positions to whether I was or wasn't a Russian asset. Google temporarily suspended my advertising account after the accusation, claiming I'd violated their terms of service even though I'd been running ads for months without issue. She pulled out internal campaign documents. My campaign manager calculated that Clinton's accusation cost us approximately $7 million in lost donations and another $3 million in ad spending we had to divert to defending my reputation instead of promoting my message. But the financial cost wasn't the worst part. She paused, and for the first time, genuine emotion entered her voice. I'm a veteran, Mrs. Clinton. I served my country in Iraq. I've deployed twice. I've worn the uniform for 20 years. And you, sitting safely in your mansion in Chappaqua, called me a traitor on national television. The room was silent. Even the reporters had stopped taking notes, transfixed. Do you have any idea what that does to someone? To have their patriotism questioned by a former Secretary of State. To have their service dismissed as a cover for treachery. I had veterans in my district, former soldiers I'd served with, call me asking if the accusations were true, asking if I'd betrayed them. Clinton looked away. She had no answer. There was no answer that would suffice. Gabbard took a breath, collecting herself. But here's what really troubles me about your accusation, Mrs. Clinton. It wasn't just personal. It was part of a broader pattern of weaponizing accusations of foreign influence against anyone who challenges the Washington establishment. She pulled out a list. In the past decade, you and your allies have accused how many people of being Russian assets or useful idiots. Jill Stein, Bernie Sanders supporters, journalists who criticized your foreign policy, anyone who questioned the Syria intervention, anyone who suggested that maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't be in a constant state of war. The accusation of being a Russian asset has become the new McCarthyism. And you, Mrs. Clinton, are its primary practitioner. Senator Cotton leaned forward. Director Gabbard, you mentioned coordination with media outlets. Can you elaborate on that? Yes, Senator. Gabbard pulled out a new stack of documents. These are emails between Clinton's political team and journalists at major outlets. Let me read from one dated October 16, 2019, one day before the podcast. Talk to Rachel Maddow's producer. They're interested in the Gabbard/Russia angle. Need background on Syria trip and Assad meetings. Can you get something from state contacts? She pulled out another. October 17th, the day of the podcast. NYT running Gabbard/Kremlin piece tomorrow. WAPO has editorial board considering piece on Gabbard's foreign policy raising concerns. CNN wants HRC for interview to expand on Russia comments. Gabbard looked up. This was a coordinated media operation, Senator. Clinton's team planted the Russia story with multiple outlets simultaneously, timed to coincide with her podcast appearance. By the time I could respond, the narrative was already set across every major platform. She pulled out news articles, each one-time stamped. October 18th, New York Times. Tulsi Gabbard's presidential campaign has become a favorite of Russia's. October 18th, Washington Post. Gabbard's candidacy reveals the rot at the heart of the Democratic primary. October 19th, CNN. Why Russia loves Tulsi Gabbard. All published within 48 hours of Clinton's accusation, all using similar language, all citing anonymous intelligence sources. She looked at Clinton. Those anonymous sources were your former colleagues at the State Department, weren't they, Mrs. Clinton? People you'd worked with for years, who owed you favors, who were willing to whisper poison in reporters' ears to take down someone you saw as a threat. Clinton's attorney tried to intervene. Mr. Chairman, these are speculations, not. These are documented communications. Senator Cotton interrupted, holding up the email printouts. Director Gabbard has provided this committee with contemporaneous emails showing coordination between the Clinton team and media outlets. Mrs. Clinton, do you deny that your team coordinated this media strategy? Clinton hesitated. The calculation was visible on her face. Deny it, and they'd call her team members to testify under oath. Admit it, and she'd validated everything Gabbard was saying. My team engaged in standard media outreach, she said carefully. Standard media outreach. Gabbard's laugh was bitter. Mrs. Clinton, when I served in Iraq, we had a term for coordinated operations designed to destroy a target through multiple simultaneous attacks. We called it a combined arms assault. That's what you launched against me. Political attacks, media attacks, all coordinated to destroy my credibility and end my campaign. And it worked, didn't it? She pulled out final polling data. By November 2019, my favorability among Democrats had dropped 22 points. I didn't qualify for the next debate. My campaign was effectively over. Mission accomplished. She leaned back in her chair, letting the evidence speak for itself. So, Mrs. Clinton, I'll ask you one more time, and I want a clear answer for the record. When you called me a Russian asset on October 17th, 2019, did you have any evidence to support that accusation, or were you lying to destroy a political opponent? The question hung in the air. Every camera in the room focused on Clinton's face. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, 10, 15. Finally, Clinton spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I believed my concerns were legitimate based on publicly available information regarding your foreign policy positions. That's not an answer. Gabbard's voice was relentless. Yes or no? Did you have evidence that I was a Russian asset? Another pause, then no. The word echoed through the chamber. Reporters immediately began typing furiously. Senators exchanged glances. Clinton's attorneys looked stricken. No evidence. Gabbard repeated it softly, letting it sink in. You had no evidence, but you made the accusation anyway because it was politically convenient, because it would destroy a threat, because you could. She closed the folder in front of her. Thank you for that admission, Mrs. Clinton. Now let's talk about your emails. The afternoon session began differently. If the morning had been about personal attacks and political vendettas, the afternoon was about national security. And as Gabbard opened her next set of files, everyone in the room understood that the stakes had just increased exponentially. Mrs. Clinton, Gabbard began, in March 2015, the House Select Committee on Benghazi issued a subpoena for all emails relating to Libya during your tenure as Secretary of State. Do you remember receiving that subpoena? Clinton nodded. Yes. And as I've testified before, we cooperated fully with that request. Fully, Gabbard let the word hang. Let me show you something. She projected a timeline onto the screen behind her, large enough for everyone to see. March 4, 2015. House Select Committee issues subpoena for Libya-related emails. March 9, 2015. Your attorneys acknowledge receipt of the subpoena. March 25-31, 2015. Your IT contractor at Platte River Networks uses BleachBit software to permanently delete approximately 33,000 emails from your private server. She looked at Clinton. To be clear, Mrs. Clinton, 3 weeks after Congress issued a subpoena for your emails, those emails were permanently destroyed using military-grade deletion software. You call that full cooperation. Clinton's attorney started to object, but she waved him off. Those 33,000 emails were personal correspondence. We had already determined they were not work-related before the subpoena was issued. Had you? Gabbard pulled out FBI testimony. Because here's what the FBI found when they recovered some of those deleted emails from other sources. Of the 17,000 work-related emails they recovered, many contained official State Department business. Some contained classified information. Several discussed Libya specifically, the exact subject of the congressional subpoena. She displayed examples on the screen, with classified markings redacted but headers visible. Email from Clinton aide regarding Libya security situation. Deleted. Email from Clinton to State Department official regarding Benghazi. Deleted. Email chain discussing classified intelligence about Libya. Deleted. Gabbard turned back to Clinton. So these personal emails about yoga routines and Chelsea's wedding somehow included classified discussions about the exact topic Congress had subpoenaed. Quite a coincidence. Clinton's face had gone rigid. As I've explained many times, the sorting process. The sorting process. Gabbard's interruption was sharp. Let's talk about that sorting process, Mrs. Clinton. Who decided which emails were personal and which were work-related? My attorneys reviewed them using search terms. Search terms. Gabbard pulled out more documents. Your attorneys, who had no security clearances, no access to classified information systems, and no knowledge of State Department operations, used keyword searches to determine which emails were relevant to Congress's investigation into whether you and your department had adequately responded to security threats in Libya. She leaned forward, and somehow, using their keyword searches, they determined that 55% of all the emails on your server were personal. More than half. You want this committee to believe that as Secretary of State, you sent more emails about yoga and wedding planning than you did about the affairs of state. Clinton's jaw clenched. I was a prolific correspondent with family and friends. I'm sure you were. Gabbard's tone was acid. But here's what troubles me, Mrs. Clinton. You didn't just delete those emails. You didn't just empty the recycle bin. You used BleachBit, a program specifically designed to prevent forensic recovery. She pulled up technical documentation. BleachBit doesn't just delete files. It overwrites the disk space multiple times with random data. It's designed for one purpose: to ensure that even expert forensic investigators with sophisticated tools cannot recover the deleted information. Senator Cotton interjected. Director Gabbard, for the record, is BleachBit commonly used for deleting personal correspondence? No, Senator. Gabbard's answer was immediate. BleachBit is used when someone wants to ensure that deleted information can never be recovered. It's used by intelligence agencies disposing of classified material. It's used by criminals trying to destroy evidence. It's not used for yoga emails. She turned back to Clinton. So my question is simple, Mrs. Clinton. If these were truly innocuous personal emails, why did you need to ensure they could never be recovered? What were you hiding? I wasn't hiding anything. Clinton's voice rose slightly. I was protecting my privacy. Your privacy? Gabbard pulled out legal briefs. Mrs. Clinton, when you served as Secretary of State, you were a federal employee. Federal records laws require that all work-related communications be preserved. You don't get to decide what's private and what's public. The law decides that. Congress decides that. But you took that decision into your own hands. She displayed the federal statute on the screen. 18 U.S.C. Section 2071. Whoever willfully and unlawfully conceals, removes, mutilates, obliterates, or destroys any record, document, or other thing filed or deposited in any public office shall be fined or imprisoned not more than 3 years or both. That's the law, Mrs. Clinton. And yet, 3 weeks after receiving a congressional subpoena, 33,000 emails were destroyed using software designed to prevent recovery. If that's not willful destruction of federal records, what is? Clinton's attorney jumped in. Mr. Chairman, Secretary Clinton was never charged with any crime related to these emails. The FBI investigated and declined to prosecute. Senator Cotton's response was cold. The FBI's decision not to prosecute doesn't mean no crime was committed, Counselor. It means they chose not to pursue it. Director Gabbard, what did FBI Director Kamei actually say about Secretary Clinton's handling of classified information? Gabbard was ready. She pulled out Kamei's July 2016 statement. Let me read directly from Director Kamei's press conference. Although we did not find clear evidence that Secretary Clinton or her colleagues intended to violate laws governing the handling of classified information, there is evidence that they were extremely careless in their handling of very sensitive, highly classified information. She continued reading. 110 emails in 52 email chains have been determined by the owning agency to contain classified information at the time they were sent or received. 8 of those chains contained information that was top secret at the time they were sent. Gabbard looked up. Extremely careless with top secret information, Mrs. Clinton. And then, after a congressional subpoena, that information was destroyed. But no prosecution because they couldn't prove intent. She pulled out comparison cases. Let me tell you about some other people who were extremely careless with classified information, Mrs. Clinton. David Petraeus, director of the CIA, shared classified information with his biographer. He was prosecuted, pleaded guilty, was fined $100,000, and sentenced to 2 years probation. Sandy Berger, President Clinton's national security advisor, removed classified documents from the National Archives. He pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor, was fined $50,000, and had his security clearance revoked. Reality Winner, an NSA contractor, leaked a single classified document. She was sentenced to 5 years and 3 months in prison. Gabbard's voice hardened. Each of those people had intent to mishandle classified information. But they also faced consequences. You, Mrs. Clinton, maintained a private server in your basement containing special access program information, the most highly classified material our government possesses. When ordered to preserve those emails, they were destroyed, and yet you faced no consequences at all. She leaned forward. So tell me, Mrs. Clinton, do you believe there's one standard of justice for the powerful and another for everyone else? Clinton's hands gripped the table. I did not break the law. Director Kamai said you were extremely careless. That's his quote, not mine. Gabbard pulled out more FBI documents. But let's talk about what extremely careless actually means. She displayed a series of emails recovered by the FBI, with classification markings visible. This email discusses the location of CIA assets in Libya, top secret SCI, sent through your unsecured private server. This email contains signals intelligence about terrorist communications, top secret, sent through your unsecured private server. This email discusses special access programs, intelligence operations so sensitive that even most people with top secret clearance can't access the information, sent through your unsecured private server. Gabbard looked at Clinton with something approaching disbelief. Mrs. Clinton, do you understand what you did? You took our nation's most closely guarded secrets and sent them through a server in your basement that had less security than a Gmail account. That server was secured, Clinton protested. Was it? Gabbard pulled out FBI technical analysis. The FBI found that your server was connected to the internet in ways that made it vulnerable to attack. It lacked basic security features, and multiple foreign intelligence agencies likely had access to your communications. She displayed the FBI's conclusion. Given the nature of the system used, it is possible that hostile actors gained access to Secretary Clinton's personal email account. Possible, Mrs. Clinton. Foreign intelligence services possibly had access to special access program information because you chose convenience over security. Clinton's face had gone pale. That was never proven. No, it was never proven. Gabbard's voice was quiet but intense. Because you destroyed the evidence, Mrs. Clinton. You used BleachBit to ensure that forensic investigators couldn't recover the full extent of what was on that server. We'll never know everything that was compromised because you made sure we couldn't find out. Senator Warner spoke up, clearly uncomfortable. Director Gabbard, I think we need to acknowledge that Secretary Clinton did cooperate with the FBI investigation and voluntarily turned over her server. Voluntarily, Senator. Gabbard turned to Warner. She turned over her server after the New York Times broke the story that it existed. She turned it over after Congress issued subpoenas. She turned it over after 33,000 emails had been permanently deleted. That's not voluntary cooperation. That's damage control after getting caught. She pulled out a timeline of events. March 2, 2015. New York Times reports that Clinton used private email server as Secretary of State. March 10, 2015. Clinton holds press conference claiming she did nothing wrong. August 2015. After months of pressure, Clinton finally turns over server to FBI. By this time, the server had been professionally wiped. BleachBit had done its job. The FBI was able to recover some emails from other sources, but thousands remained permanently destroyed. Gabbard looked at Clinton. You didn't cooperate, Mrs. Clinton. You got caught, you destroyed evidence, and then you handed over what you couldn't hide anymore. That's not cooperation. That's obstruction. Clinton's attorney stood. Mr. Chairman, I must object. Director Gabbard is making serious allegations with extensive documentation. Senator Cotton interrupted. Every statement Director Gabbard has made is supported by FBI reports, congressional testimony, or Secretary Clinton's own emails. Mrs. Clinton, do you dispute any of the facts Director Gabbard has presented? Clinton hesitated. I dispute her characterization of those facts, but not the facts themselves. Gabbard pounced. You don't dispute that you maintained a private server. You don't dispute that it contained classified information. You don't dispute that 33,000 emails were deleted after a congressional subpoena. You don't dispute that BleachBit was used to prevent recovery. You just dispute that any of that was wrong. She closed the folder. Mrs. Clinton, I served in Iraq. I held a security clearance. I handled classified information in combat zones. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that if I had done even a fraction of what you did, if I had sent a single classified email through an unauthorized server, I would have been court-martialed. My career would have been over. I likely would have gone to prison. But you ran for president. You almost won. And when questions were raised, you claimed it was a vast right-wing conspiracy, that it was politically motivated, that you'd done nothing wrong. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. Tell me, Mrs. Clinton, do you believe the rules apply to you? The silence was absolute. Clinton stared at Gabbard, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. I followed the guidance I was given. The guidance you were given. Gabbard pulled out one final document. Mrs. Clinton, this is the non-disclosure agreement you signed when you became Secretary of State. Your signature is at the bottom. She began reading. I hereby acknowledge that I have received a security indoctrination concerning the nature and protection of classified information. I understand that unauthorized disclosure, unauthorized retention, or negligent handling of classified information by me could cause damage or irreparable injury to the United States, or could be used to advantage by a foreign nation. Gabbard looked up. You signed this, Mrs. Clinton. You acknowledged that you understood the rules, and then you spent 4 years violating every principle in this document. She stood, gathering her papers. This committee will take a brief recess. When we return, we'll discuss Benghazi. The word hung in the air like a threat. Clinton's face went rigid. Her attorneys immediately huddled around her, whispering urgently. As the senators filed out, the gallery buzzed with conversation. Reporters were already typing furiously, updating their articles in real time. Tulsi Gabbard walked out of the hearing room without looking back. She'd spent the morning dismantling Clinton's reputation. The afternoon would be devoted to something even more serious: the 4 Americans who died on her watch. And from the look on Clinton's face, she knew exactly what was coming. When the hearing resumed 40 minutes later, the atmosphere had shifted. If the morning had been tense, the afternoon was somber. 4 photographs now sat on easels at the front of the room. Ambassador Chris Stevens, Information Officer Sean Smith, Navy SEALs Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty. 4 men who had died on September 11, 2012 in Benghazi, Libya. Gabbard began without preamble. Mrs. Clinton, I want to talk about September 11, 2012, about what you knew when you knew it and what you told the American people. Clinton's expression was carefully controlled, the same solemn mask she'd worn through previous Benghazi hearings. But there was wariness in her eyes now. She'd survived these questions before, but never from Tulsi Gabbard, never from someone who had combat experience, who understood what it meant to be under fire and waiting for help that never came. At 4:05 p.m. Washington time on September 11, 2012, Gabbard began. You received an email from your staff with the subject line, Update on Benghazi. The email stated, Ansar al-Sharia has claimed responsibility for the attack. She looked at Clinton. Ansar al-Sharia is a terrorist organization, Mrs. Clinton. So at 4:05 p.m., barely an hour after the attack began, you knew this was terrorism, not a protest. Correct. The situation was fluid, Clinton began. Initial reports are often. Mrs. Clinton. Gabbard's interruption was gentle but firm. Yes or no? At 4:05 p.m. on September 11, 2012, did you receive an email stating that a terrorist organization had claimed responsibility for the attack? Yes. So you knew it was terrorism. Gabbard pulled out another email. At 10:08 p.m. that same night, you sent an email to your daughter Chelsea. You wrote, and I quote, 2 of our officers were killed in Benghazi by an al-Qaeda-like group. She looked up. You told your daughter it was terrorism, not a protest, not a spontaneous demonstration. Terrorism, yes or no? Yes. And the next day, September 12th, you spoke with the Egyptian Prime Minister. According to the State Department transcript, you told him, we know that the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack. not a protest. Gabbard set down the transcript. So you told foreign leaders the truth. It was a planned terrorist attack. The anti-Muslim video had nothing to do with it. Correct. That was our assessment at the time, Clinton said carefully. Your assessment? Gabbard pulled out video footage, cueing it up on the screen. Then why, Mrs. Clinton, on September 14, 2012, at Dover Air Force Base, as the flag-draped coffins of these 4 Americans were being carried off a military transport plane, did you tell their families that the attack was caused by an inflammatory video? The video began playing. Clinton at Dover speaking with the families. The audio was muted, but everyone in the room had seen this footage before. Gabbard let it play for a moment, then stopped it. Tyrone Woods' father, Charles Woods, took notes during your conversation. He wrote down your words. We will make sure that the person who made that film is arrested and prosecuted. She turned to Clinton. You looked those grieving families in the eye, Mrs. Clinton, and you lied to them. While their sons and husbands lay in coffins behind you, you blamed a YouTube video that you knew had nothing to do with the attack. Why? I don't believe I said that, Clinton began. Charles Woods has his notes. Gabbard pulled out a photocopy of the handwritten notes. September 14, 2012. Hillary Clinton. We will arrest and prosecute the man who made the video. That's his handwriting, Mrs. Clinton. That's what he wrote down while you spoke to him. She pulled out more testimony. Patricia Smith, Sean Smith's mother, has said repeatedly that you told her the attack was caused by the video. Greg Hicks, the deputy chief of mission in Libya, has testified that you promoted the video narrative even though everyone on the ground knew it was false. So I'll ask again, why did you lie to those families? Clinton's composure cracked slightly. I was providing them with the best information we had at the time. The best information you had. Gabbard's voice rose for the first time. Mrs. Clinton, at 4:05 p.m. you knew it was terrorism. At 10:08 p.m. you told your daughter it was Al-Qaeda. On September 12th you told the Egyptian Prime Minister it had nothing to do with the video. But on September 14th you told the families it was the video. She leaned forward. The best information you had didn't change between September 11th and September 14th. What changed was the political situation. You had an election to win. President Obama had campaigned on decimating Al-Qaeda. And here was proof that Al-Qaeda wasn't decimated, that terrorism was still a threat, that your Libya policy had created chaos. So you lied. You lied to those families because the truth was politically inconvenient. That is not what happened, Clinton said, her voice strained. Then what did happen? Gabbard pulled out more evidence. Because on September 13th, the day after you told Egypt's Prime Minister the video had nothing to do with the attack, your State Department authorized $70,000 in taxpayer money for advertisements in Pakistan denouncing the video. She displayed the authorization document. You were so committed to the video narrative that you spent American tax dollars promoting it in foreign countries, even though you knew it was false. And then, on September 16th, you sent UN Ambassador Susan Rice to 5 Sunday morning talk shows. On every single show, she blamed the video. On every single show, she said it was a spontaneous protest gone wrong. Gabbard played clips from each appearance. A montage of Susan Rice repeating the same false narrative across 5 different networks. Ambassador Rice was relying on talking points provided by the intelligence community, Clinton said. Was she? Gabbard pulled out emails. Because these are emails between your State Department staff and the White House discussing those talking points. And guess what they show, Mrs. Clinton? Your people were editing the talking points, removing references to terrorism, removing references to Al-Qaeda, removing anything that might make your Libya policy look bad. She displayed the email chain, showing multiple revisions with State Department objections. The talking points need to be revised. References to previous warnings should be removed. We need to be careful about suggesting this was a failure of policy. Gabbard looked at Clinton. You didn't just push a false narrative, Mrs. Clinton. You actively worked to sanitize the intelligence to protect yourself politically. While those families were grieving, while those men were still lying in coffins, You were editing talking points to cover up the truth. Senator Cotton spoke. Director Gabbard, why does the video narrative matter so much? Why would Secretary Clinton push a false story? Because, Senator, the truth was devastating to her politically. Gabbard pulled out a comprehensive timeline. Let me walk through what actually happened in Libya and why Secretary Clinton needed to hide it. She displayed a map of Libya on the screen. In 2011, Mrs. Clinton was one of the strongest advocates for military intervention in Libya. She pushed President Obama to support the rebels fighting Muammar Gaddafi. She convinced him that we could remove Gaddafi, that democracy would flourish, that Libya would be a success story. Gabbard pulled up video of Clinton discussing Libya in 2011, her enthusiasm evident. And when Gaddafi was killed in October 2011, Secretary Clinton went on television and laughed. She played the infamous clip, Clinton's voice, "We came, we saw, he died," followed by her cackling laugh. Gabbard let the audio echo through the chamber. That's the sound of someone celebrating a military victory, Senator. But what happened after we came and we saw and he died? She advanced through slides, showing the deterioration of Libya. Gaddafi's weapons arsenals were looted. Thousands of surface-to-air missiles disappeared, ending up in the hands of terrorist groups across Africa. Libya became a failed state. Rival militias fought for control. ISIS established a foothold. The country became a haven for terrorists. And our diplomatic compound in Benghazi became increasingly vulnerable. She pulled out security cables, dozens of them, each marked with dates and urgency levels. June 25, 2012, security cable from Ambassador Stevens requesting additional security personnel. Request denied. July 9, 2012, security cable warning of rising threat levels in Benghazi. Request for additional security denied. August 16, 2012, Emergency Action Committee meeting discussing deteriorating security. Recommendations not implemented. Gabbard looked at Clinton. Between January and September 2012, the State Department received more than 600 requests for additional security in Libya. Diplomatic security agents testified that they were told to do more with less. The British closed their consulate in Benghazi after an assassination attempt. The Red Cross pulled out after attacks, but we stayed, with minimal security, in a city increasingly controlled by terrorists. She pulled out testimony from Eric Nordstrom, the regional security officer in Libya. He told Congress, and I quote, "It was abundantly clear that we were not going to get resources until the aftermath of an incident. How thin does the ice have to get before someone falls through?" Gabbard's voice hardened. Ambassador Stevens fell through, Mrs. Clinton. Sean Smith fell through. Tyrone Woods fell through. Glenn Doherty fell through. And it was because you ignored their requests for help. Clinton's face had gone rigid. I never saw those cables personally. You never saw 600 security requests. Gabbard's disbelief was palpable. Mrs. Clinton, you were the Secretary of State. These cables were addressed to the State Department's senior leadership. Are you seriously claiming that in a deteriorating security environment, in a country that was falling apart because of your intervention, nobody thought to inform you that our people were begging for help? The silence was damning. Senator Warner shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. Let me tell you what I think happened, Mrs. Clinton. Gabbard's voice was quiet but intense. I think you knew that Libya was falling apart. I think you knew it made your intervention look disastrous. And I think you made a calculated decision that acknowledging the security threats would require admitting that your Libya policy had failed. So you kept security minimal. You ignored the requests. You told yourself that nothing would happen. And when it did happen, when 4 Americans died because they didn't have adequate protection, you lied about why they died because telling the truth would mean admitting you were responsible. That is a gross mischaracterization, Clinton protested. Is it? Gabbard pulled out more evidence. Let's talk about what happened during the attack itself. The assault on the diplomatic compound began at approximately 9:40 p.m. local time. Ambassador Stevens, Sean Smith, and 2 diplomatic security agents were inside. She displayed a timeline of the attack, minute by minute. 9:40 p.m., attack begins. 10:00 p.m. Agents evacuate Stevens and Smith to a safe room, but smoke from fires set by attackers fills the building. 11:00 p.m. Smith dies from smoke inhalation. Stevens is missing. Meanwhile, at a CIA annex about 1 mile away, a security team including Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty prepared to respond, but they were told to wait. Gabbard's voice dropped. They were told to stand down, Mrs. Clinton. American security personnel wanted to help, were ready to help, but were ordered to wait for Libyan security forces that never came. She pulled out testimony from security personnel who were there. We could hear the gunfire. We knew our people were in trouble, but we were told to wait. Eventually, against orders, they went anyway. Gabbard's voice carried a mix of admiration and anger. They went anyway, Mrs. Clinton. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't wait for orders. They heard Americans under fire and they went. They arrived at the compound, fought off the attackers, and evacuated the surviving personnel to the CIA annex. But they couldn't find Ambassador Stevens. She displayed photos of the compound in flames. Ambassador Stevens had tried to escape through a window but was overcome by smoke. Libyans found him and took him to a hospital, where he died from smoke inhalation. Meanwhile, at the CIA annex, the security team came under mortar attack. Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty were killed on the rooftop while defending their colleagues. Gabbard's voice was thick with emotion. Those two men didn't have to be there, Mrs. Clinton. They were at the annex. They could have stayed safe, but they heard the attack. They grabbed their weapons, and they ran toward the sound of gunfire because that's what American service members do. And they died on that rooftop after fighting for 7 hours, waiting for help that never came. She looked at Clinton. Where was the help, Mrs. Clinton? Where were the quick reaction forces? Where was the military support? We had assets in the region. We had special operations forces. We had air support available. Why didn't anyone come? Multiple military officials have testified that there wasn't enough time. Clinton began. There wasn't enough time. Gabbard's voice rose. Mrs. Clinton, the attack lasted 13 hours. 13 hours. We have special operations forces specifically trained for rapid response. We have aircraft that can reach anywhere in the Mediterranean within hours. She pulled out military testimony. General Carter Ham, commander of AFRICOM, testified that he wasn't even asked to prepare forces for a rescue attempt. Admiral James Stavridis, NATO Supreme Commander, testified that European-based assets weren't considered. Why? She demanded. Why were our people on that rooftop for 13 hours without support? Clinton had no answer. The silence stretched painfully. I'll tell you why, Gabbard said quietly. Because sending military forces would have meant admitting this was a terrorist attack. It would have meant admitting Libya was unstable. It would have meant admitting your intervention had created chaos. So instead of sending help, you crafted a story about a protest over a video. She pulled out more evidence. On September 14th, the day you lied to those families at Dover, President Obama's Deputy National Security Advisor Benjamin Rhodes sent an email about messaging. The subject line was RE, Prep Call with Susan. Gabbard read from the email. Goals: to underscore that these protests are rooted in an internet video and not a broader failure of policy. She looked up. Not a broader failure of policy. That's what this was about, Mrs. Clinton. Protecting your political future. Protecting the narrative that Obama had decimated al-Qaeda and that your Libya intervention was a success. 4 Americans died, and your primary concern was spin control. Clinton's hands gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. I have said many times that I take responsibility for what happened in Benghazi. You take responsibility. Gabbard stood, her voice cold. Mrs. Clinton, during one of the previous Benghazi hearings, when you were asked about the false narrative you'd promoted, do you remember what you said? She played the video clip. Clinton's voice, frustrated and angry. What difference at this point does it make? The phrase that had defined her Benghazi testimony, that had enraged millions of Americans, now echoed through the chamber. Gabbard turned off the video. It makes all the difference, Mrs. Clinton. It makes a difference to Charles Woods, who wrote down your lie in his notebook. It makes a difference to Patricia Smith, who's been telling anyone who will listen that you lied to her face. It makes a difference to those of us who have served in combat zones and know what it's like to need help and have it never arrive. Most of all, it makes a difference because those 4 men died due to policy decisions you championed and security requests you ignored. And then you lied about how they died because the truth would have hurt your political career. She gathered her papers. This committee will take a 1-hour recess before we discuss the Clinton Foundation. As the senators filed out, Hillary Clinton remained seated, staring at the 4 photographs of the dead Americans. For the first time all day, her mask completely fell away. She looked haunted, diminished, defeated. Tulsi Gabbard walked past without a glance. She had more evidence to present. The afternoon was far from over. When the hearing resumed, Gabbard's demeanor had shifted again. If Benghazi had been about tragedy and accountability, this next section was about corruption. Pure, unvarnished corruption. Mrs. Clinton, let's discuss the Clinton Foundation. Gabbard began. Specifically, let's discuss the foreign governments that donated millions of dollars to your family's foundation while you served as Secretary of State. Clinton straightened in her chair. The Clinton Foundation has saved millions of lives through its work on HIV/AIDS, climate change, and global health initiatives. I'm not questioning the Foundation's charitable work, Gabbard interrupted. I'm questioning how foreign governments use donations to your family foundation to buy access to America's chief diplomat. She pulled up a chart showing donations by country and amount. Between 2009 and 2013, while you served as Secretary of State, the Clinton Foundation received contributions from Saudi Arabia, between $10 and $25 million, Qatar, between $1 and $5 million, Kuwait, between $1 and $5 million, United Arab Emirates, between $1 and $5 million, Oman, between $1 and $5 million. Gabbard looked at Clinton. These countries aren't exactly bastions of democracy, Mrs. Clinton. They're absolute monarchies with abysmal human rights records, particularly regarding women and LGBTQ individuals, causes your foundation claims to champion. So why were they giving millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation? They gave to support our humanitarian work, Clinton said, but her voice lacked conviction. Did they? Gabbard pulled out internal emails. Because these emails tell a different story. She displayed an email from Huma Abedin, Clinton's deputy chief of staff, to another State Department official. The email concerned a request for a meeting with Secretary Clinton from a Clinton Foundation donor. The staffer questioned whether the meeting was necessary. Abedin's response was succinct. He's been a significant donor. We should try to accommodate. Gabbard pulled out another email, this one from Doug Band, who ran the Clinton Global Initiative, to Abedin and Cheryl Mills. Need to secure a meeting between Crown Prince of Bahrain and HRC. He's been a good friend to CGI. The response from Abedin, I'll see what I can do. Gabbard looked at Clinton. This is pay-to-play, Mrs. Clinton. Foreign governments and wealthy individuals gave money to your family's foundation, and in exchange, they got access to you and your staff at the State Department. Those emails don't prove anything improper, Clinton protested. Don't they? Gabbard pulled out more correspondence. Let me read you another one. This is from Doug Band to Cheryl Mills and Huma Abedin, dated November 2009. Need Gilbert Chagri's contact number. Important. Mills responds asking who that is. Band replies, he's a top supporter of CGI. He wants to speak with someone at State about his interests. Gabbard looked up. Gilbert Chagri, for the record, is a Lebanese-Nigerian billionaire with a controversial past, including allegations of money laundering. But he donated between $1 and $5 million to the Clinton Foundation. So when he wanted something from the State Department, your staff accommodated him. She pulled out more emails showing the State Department arranging meetings, making introductions, and facilitating contacts for foundation donors. Mrs. Clinton, you repeatedly said there was a firewall between your work at the State Department and the Clinton Foundation. But these emails show your senior staff, people with State Department positions and security clearances, routinely coordinating foundation business with government business. Senator Cotton leaned in. Director Gabbard, can you provide specific examples of policy decisions that may have benefited foundation donors? Yes, Senator. Gabbard pulled out a thick file. Let's start with Russia and the Uranium One deal. The words Uranium One caused a visible stir in the gallery. This was territory that had been discussed before, but never in a formal congressional setting with this level of documentation. In 2010, Gabbard began. A Canadian company called Uranium One, which controlled approximately 20% of America's uranium production capacity, was being acquired by Rosatom, the Russian state nuclear agency. This acquisition required approval from multiple U.S. government agencies, including the State Department. She pulled out financial records. During and shortly after the time this deal was under review, Ian Telfer, chairman of Uranium One, donated $2.35 million to the Clinton Foundation. Frank Giustra, a Canadian mining magnate with significant Uranium One holdings, pledged $100 million to the Clinton Foundation. Multiple other Uranium One shareholders donated a combined $8.65 million. And Bill Clinton was paid $500,000 for a single speech in Moscow by Renaissance Capital, a Russian investment bank with ties to the Kremlin that was promoting Uranium One stock. Gabbard looked at Clinton. The State Department, under your leadership, approved the sale. 20% of America's uranium production capacity ended up under Russian control, and millions of dollars flowed to your family foundation from people who benefited directly from that approval. I was not personally involved in the approval process, Clinton said quickly. That decision was made by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which includes 9 different agencies. But the State Department was one of those 9 agencies, Gabbard countered. And you appointed the person who represented the State Department on that committee. Are you seriously telling me that $11.35 million in donations from deal principals had no influence whatsoever? She didn't wait for an answer. Let's look at another example. After the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, billions of dollars in aid flowed to that devastated country. Your State Department played a major role in coordinating that aid. The Clinton Foundation also got heavily involved. Gabbard pulled out documents showing contract awards in Haiti. Somehow, reconstruction contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars went to Clinton Foundation donors. VCS Mining, a company whose board included your brother Tony Rodham despite his complete lack of mining experience, received one of the first gold mining permits issued in Haiti in over 50 years. Clinton's face flushed. I had nothing to do with your brother sitting on the board of a mining company getting permits in Haiti while you oversaw earthquake relief. Mrs. Clinton, Haitian activists protested outside the Clinton Foundation. Investigative journalists documented how foundation donors received preferential treatment for reconstruction contracts. They called it disaster capitalism. She pulled out articles from Haiti Grassroots Watch and other investigative outlets, documenting the pattern of Clinton Foundation donors receiving lucrative Haiti contracts. But here's what really exposes the pay-to-play scheme, Mrs. Clinton. Gabbard pulled up a revenue chart. Look at Clinton Foundation donations over time. The chart showed a dramatic spike during Clinton's tenure as Secretary of State, a continued high level in 2013-2015 as she prepared to run for president, and then a catastrophic drop after her 2016 election loss. In 2016, the Clinton Foundation received $216 million in donations. In 2017, after you lost the election, donations dropped to $26 million, an 88% decrease. She pulled up more data. The Clinton Global Initiative, which had held annual meetings attended by world leaders and billionaires, shut down in 2016 after your election loss. Countries that had donated millions while you had power suddenly stopped giving. Saudi Arabia, which had been a major donor, stopped. Qatar stopped. The United Arab Emirates stopped. Gabbard looked directly at Clinton. If these countries and individuals were genuinely committed to your foundation's charitable work, why did they stop donating when you lost political power? The answer is obvious, Mrs. Clinton. They weren't investing in charity. They were investing in influence. And when you had no more influence to sell, they stopped buying. Senator Warner spoke, clearly uncomfortable. Director Gabbard, I think we need to be careful about alleging corruption without direct evidence of quid pro quo. Direct evidence, Senator. Gabbard pulled out more emails. Let me show you what quid pro quo looks like. She displayed an email chain from June 2009, shortly after Clinton became Secretary of State. Doug Ban to Huma Abedin and Cheryl Mills. Urgent. Need to help find a position for name redacted. He's done a lot for the foundation and for WJC William Jefferson Clinton. Abedin responds, we're working on it, several options being explored. 2 weeks later, meeting arranged with name redacted at State. Ambassador post possibilities being discussed. Gabbard looked at the committee. A Clinton Foundation donor asks for help finding a government position. Secretary Clinton's staff facilitates meetings and explores ambassadorships. That's not charitable work, Senator. That's a shadow patronage system. She pulled out more examples. There are dozens of these emails, Senators. Foundation donors requesting favors, seeking meetings, asking for policy considerations. And in nearly every case, Secretary Clinton's staff at the State Department accommodated them. Here's one from a foundation donor requesting help with a visa issue for a foreign national. Normally, visa matters go through proper channels. But because this person had donated to the foundation, Cheryl Mills personally intervened. Here's another. A foundation donor wants the State Department to pressure a foreign government on a business matter. Huma Abedin arranges a call between the donor and a senior State Department official. Gabbard spread the emails across the table. This is systemic, Mrs. Clinton. This is a pattern of using your position as Secretary of State to reward people who gave money to your family foundation. Clinton's attorney tried to intervene. Mr. Chairman, these emails don't prove any illegal activity. Facilitating meetings is part of government work. Senator Cotton's response was sharp. Facilitating meetings for people who gave millions to the Secretary's family foundation isn't normal government work, Counselor. It's corruption. Gabbard continued. But let's talk about perhaps the most damning evidence of all, Mrs. Clinton, your speaking fees. She pulled up financial records. In 2013, as you prepared to leave the State Department and run for president, your speaking fees skyrocketed. You gave 51 speeches and earned $5.5 million. Some of those speeches paid $250,000 or more. She displayed a list of organizations that paid Clinton for speeches. Goldman Sachs, $225,000 per speech, multiple speeches. UBS, $225,000. Deutsche Bank, $260,000. Morgan Stanley, $225,000. Gabbard looked at Clinton. These aren't just any organizations, Mrs. Clinton. Many of them were Clinton Foundation donors. Many of them had business before the State Department while you served, and they paid you hundreds of thousands of dollars for speeches that witnesses have described as unremarkable, nothing that would justify such extraordinary fees. She pulled out testimony from people who attended these speeches. One banking executive told investigators, the speech was generic stuff about leadership and global trends. Honestly, we could have gotten similar content from any number of speakers for $25,000, but we paid $225,000 because it was Hillary Clinton and we wanted access. Access, Mrs. Clinton. They weren't paying for your insights. They were paying for your influence. But here's the most revealing part. Gabbard advanced to another slide. After you lost the 2016 election, your speaking fees collapsed. Organizations that had paid $225,000 for a speech when you had power stopped calling. Your speaking calendar went from packed to nearly empty. Why? Because without political power, you had nothing to sell. Senator Cotton interjected. Director Gabbard, What's the total financial benefit the Clintons received from these arrangements? Gabbard pulled out comprehensive financial analysis. Between 2001 and 2016, the Clintons earned $153 million in speaking fees. During the years Hillary Clinton served as Secretary of State, and immediately after, as she prepared to run for president, those fees were at their highest. Additionally, the Clinton Foundation raised approximately $2 billion during its existence, with the bulk of that money coming during the years when Hillary Clinton held, or was expected to hold, political power. She looked at Clinton. "You turned public service into a profit center, Mrs. Clinton. Foreign governments, corporations, and wealthy individuals gave hundreds of millions to your foundation and paid enormous speaking fees to you and your husband. In return, they got access, influence, and favorable consideration. And the moment you lost power, the money stopped. That tells us everything we need to know about whether these payments were about charity or about corruption." Clinton's hands were shaking now, a fine tremor she couldn't quite control. For years, she deflected these questions, dismissed them as partisan attacks, relied on the complexity of the arrangements to obscure the simple truth. But Tulsi Gabbard had laid it all out clearly, simply, undeniably. The timeline, the donations, the emails, the pattern. "Mrs. Clinton," Gabbard said quietly, "you spent your career claiming to fight for transparency and accountability. But the evidence shows you used the office of Secretary of State to enrich your family foundation and build a political war chest. You sold access to America's foreign policy to the highest bidders." She closed her files. "We'll take one final break before the concluding session." As Clinton stood on shaky legs, supported by her attorneys, the weight of the afternoon hung heavy in the air. The hearing had already produced damning revelations about the emails, about Benghazi, about the foundation. But everyone in that room knew that Gabbard had saved the most explosive material for last. The final session would be about the 2016 election, about the Steele dossier, about how Hillary Clinton had weaponized American intelligence agencies against her political opponents. And from the look on Clinton's face, she knew she had no defense left. The evening session began with the room more crowded than it had been all day. Word had spread about the devastating testimony, and reporters who'd left to file stories had rushed back. This was the finale, the culmination of everything that had come before. Tulsi Gabbard sat at her position, 3 new document boxes beside her. She looked tired. The day had been long, but her eyes remained sharp, focused. This was what she'd been building toward. "Mrs. Clinton," she began, her voice calm despite the electric tension in the room, "I want to close today by discussing your 2016 presidential campaign. Specifically, what you did when it became clear you might lose." Clinton's expression hardened. She'd been through Benghazi questioning, through email interrogations, through Clinton Foundation allegations. But this was the most dangerous territory of all. In April 2016, your campaign and the Democratic National Committee hired a law firm, Perkins Coie. Gabbard pulled out financial records. Through Perkins Coie, you hired Fusion GPS, an opposition research firm. And Fusion GPS hired Christopher Steele, a former British intelligence officer, to investigate Donald Trump. The total expenditure was $1,024,407, paid through the law firm to obscure the actual client. "Opposition research is standard in political campaigns," Clinton said, her voice carefully controlled. "Is it?" Gabbard pulled out the now infamous dossier, its pages marked with classification stamps from the subsequent intelligence community review. "What Christopher Steele produced wasn't standard opposition research, Mrs. Clinton. It was a collection of unverified, salacious allegations sourced primarily from Russian nationals with connections to the Kremlin." She let that sink in. "Your campaign, Mrs. Clinton, paid a foreign intelligence operative to collect information from Russian sources to influence an American election. The very thing you later accused Donald Trump of doing, you actually did." "That's a complete mischaracterization," Clinton protested. "Is it?" Gabbard opened the dossier. "Let's look at what this document contains. allegations that Trump had been compromised by Russian intelligence, claims of secret meetings between Trump campaign officials and Russian operatives, accusations of financial impropriety, and of course, the most salacious material that I won't repeat in this hearing, but that BuzzFeed published in full in January 2017. She looked at Clinton. None of it was verified. The FBI, despite significant effort, could not confirm the core allegations. Special Counsel Mueller, after a 2-year investigation, found no evidence of collusion. But that didn't matter, did it? Because the damage was already done. Senator Cotton leaned in. Director Gabbard, how did this dossier move from opposition research to intelligence investigation? That's the crucial question, Senator. Gabbard pulled out FBI documents, timelines, and correspondence. In July 2016, as the dossier was being compiled, Christopher Steele began sharing his findings with the FBI. He also shared them with State Department officials, many of whom were Mrs. Clinton's former colleagues. She displayed a timeline. July 2016, Steele meets with FBI agents in Rome, provides dossier memos. September 2016, FBI opens investigation into Trump campaign. October 2016, FBI uses dossier as supporting evidence in FISA application to surveil Carter Page, a Trump campaign associate. January 2017, FBI Director Comey briefs President-elect Trump on dossier contents. January 2017, BuzzFeed publishes full dossier. Gabbard looked at Clinton. Here's what troubles me, Mrs. Clinton. The FBI used opposition research paid for by your campaign as justification to obtain surveillance warrants on American citizens. They presented it to the FISA court as credible intelligence without fully disclosing that it was funded by a political campaign. Senator Warner interrupted. Director Gabbard, didn't the FBI tell the FISA court that Steele was hired by people seeking to discredit Trump? They used vague language, Senator. Gabbard pulled out the FISA application. The FBI told the court that Steele was hired by people who wanted to discredit Trump, but they didn't say those people were his opposing presidential campaign. They presented it as intelligence, not as political propaganda. She turned back to Clinton. And while the FBI was using your funded dossier to obtain surveillance warrants, your campaign was pushing the Russian narrative through media outlets. Gabbard displayed tweets from Clinton's campaign account. October 31, 2016. Computer scientists have apparently uncovered a covert server linking the Trump organization to a Russian-based bank. She looked at Clinton. That wasn't true, Mrs. Clinton. The Alpha Bank server story was debunked almost immediately, but you tweeted it anyway with 1 week left until the election. She pulled out more evidence. This is an email from Michael Sussman, a lawyer working for your campaign, to FBI General Counsel James Baker. Sussman presented the Alpha Bank allegations to the FBI, failing to disclose that he was working for your campaign. He later pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about that. Gabbard's voice was hard. Your campaign lawyer lied to federal investigators to promote a false story about Trump and Russia. But it gets worse. She pulled out declassified intelligence. In July 2016, U.S. intelligence agencies received information suggesting that your campaign was planning to vilify Donald Trump by claiming he was compromised by Russian intelligence. She read from the declassified document. U.S. intelligence obtained insight into Russian intelligence analysis, alleging that U.S. presidential candidate Hillary Clinton approved a campaign plan to stir up a scandal against Donald Trump by tying him to Putin and the Russians' hacking of the Democratic National Committee. Gabbard looked up. The CIA briefed President Obama on this intelligence. They knew that you were planning to create a Russia scandal. Yet somehow, instead of investigating your campaign's role in manufacturing this narrative, the FBI investigated Trump. Clinton's face had gone pale. That intelligence was Russian disinformation. Was it? Or was it accurate reporting by Russian intelligence about what they observed your campaign planning? Gabbard pulled out more documents. because what actually happened aligns perfectly with that intelligence assessment. Your campaign funded the dossier. Your campaign lawyer fed information to the FBI. Your campaign pushed the Russia narrative through media. And after Trump won, you and your allies spent 4 years insisting his presidency was illegitimate because of Russian interference. She pulled out video compilation clips of Clinton from 2016-2020, repeatedly calling Trump's election illegitimate, repeatedly suggesting collusion, repeatedly undermining the presidency. 2 years and $32 million later, Special Counsel Mueller found no collusion, Gabbard said. No evidence that Trump or his campaign coordinated with Russia. But by then, the damage was done. The country was torn apart. Families were divided. Trust in our institutions was shattered. And it all started with opposition research. You funded using Russian sources that you then weaponized through intelligence agencies and media. Senator Cotton spoke. Director Gabbard, what did Special Counsel John Durham conclude in his investigation of the Russia investigation? Gabbard pulled out the Durham report, released after years of investigation. Durham concluded that the FBI had no verified intelligence to justify opening a full investigation into the Trump campaign. He found that the FBI gave Clinton's campaign's allegations a pass on scrutiny because of political considerations. He determined that if the same standards had been applied to both campaigns, the FBI should have opened an investigation into the Clinton campaign's connections to foreign nationals, not the Trump campaign. She looked at Clinton. Durham's report, Mrs. Clinton, essentially concluded that the FBI had a double standard. When your campaign allies brought them unverified allegations about Trump, they opened investigations. When intelligence suggested your campaign was manufacturing a Russia scandal, they ignored it. You got special treatment, again. Clinton's attorney stood. Mr. Chairman, Secretary Clinton was not charged with any crimes related to these matters. The Durham investigation resulted in only one significant conviction. That's because proving conspiracy is difficult, Senator Cotton responded. But the pattern of conduct is clear. Mrs. Clinton, do you deny that your campaign funded the Steele dossier? Silence. Do you deny that your campaign was pushing the Russia narrative through media outlets? More silence. Do you deny that your campaign lawyer lied to the FBI about who he was representing when he brought allegations about Trump? Clinton finally spoke. I had no knowledge of the specific day-to-day operations of Mrs. Clinton. Gabbard's interruption was sharp. Your campaign paid over $1 million for the Steele dossier. Your campaign manager, Robbie Mook, testified under oath that he discussed the Alpha Bank allegations with you personally. Are you seriously claiming that a 7-figure expenditure on opposition research about Russian ties happened without your knowledge? Clinton's hands gripped the table. I don't recall the specific conversations. You don't recall? Gabbard stood for the first time, her voice rising. You don't recall paying $1 million to investigate your opponent's Russia connections. You don't recall the Alpha Bank story that you personally tweeted. You don't recall the narrative that defined your campaign's final months. Mrs. Clinton, you called me a Russian asset. But everything I've documented today shows that you're the one who paid for Russian-sourced information. You're the one who weaponized intelligence agencies against political opponents. You're the one who spread false information about foreign interference to win an election. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper but carrying through the silent chamber. So I have one final question for you, Mrs. Clinton. If I'm a Russian asset, what does that make you? The silence was absolute. Every person in that room held their breath. Cameras zoomed in on Clinton's face, capturing every micro-expression, every sign of the internal calculation happening behind her eyes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Clinton spoke. I have nothing further to say. This hearing has become a partisan. Partisan? Gabbard's laugh was bitter. Mrs. Clinton, everything I've presented today is documented in FBI reports, congressional testimony, special counsel findings, court documents, and your own emails and tweets. These aren't partisan allegations. These are facts. Facts that show you used your position as Secretary of State to enrich your family foundation. Facts that show you mishandled classified information and destroyed evidence. Facts that show you lied to the families of Americans who died in Benghazi. Facts that show you funded a dossier using Russian sources and then weaponized it through intelligence agencies to damage your political opponent. Senator Cotton cleared his throat. Mrs. Clinton, this committee will be referring these matters to the Department of Justice for review. We will also be issuing a comprehensive report detailing what we've learned today. You are dismissed. Clinton stood, her movements mechanical. She gathered her papers with shaking hands. Her attorneys flanked her, creating a protective barrier. As she walked toward the exit, not a single reporter called out a question. They were too stunned, still processing the magnitude of what they'd just witnessed. Tulsi Gabbard remained seated, methodically organizing her files with the precision of someone completing a mission. She didn't watch Clinton leave. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. The hearing had lasted 9 hours. 9 hours of documented evidence, of emails, of testimony, of facts that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. 9 hours that had systematically dismantled the carefully constructed public image of one of the most powerful women in American politics. As the chamber emptied, Senator Cotton approached Gabbard. "That was thorough," he said simply. "It needed to be." Gabbard closed the last file. "This wasn't about politics, Senator. This was about accountability." The video of the hearing exploded across social media within minutes of its conclusion. By midnight, it had been viewed 30 million times. By the next morning, 80 million. Clinton accountability trended #1 worldwide. Gabbard hearing generated millions of posts. Even mainstream media outlets that had spent years defending Clinton couldn't ignore what had been presented. The evidence was too comprehensive, too well-documented, too damning. CNN's headline: Gabbard presents extensive evidence of Clinton email deletion, foundation donations. The New York Times: Senate hearing reveals new details about Clinton's role in Steele dossier funding. The Washington Post: Clinton unable to answer key questions in Senate intelligence testimony. Fox News was less restrained. Gabbard destroys Clinton, 9 hours of devastating testimony. Within 48 hours, the Department of Justice announced it was opening formal investigations into multiple matters. Whether Clinton obstructed justice in the deletion of subpoenaed emails, whether Clinton violated laws regarding the handling of classified information, whether Clinton made false statements to federal investigators during the FBI's 2016 investigation, whether the Clinton Foundation violated tax laws or foreign agent registration requirements. The announcement sent shockwaves through Washington. For years, Clinton had been insulated from prosecution, protected by political considerations and her position within the Democratic Party establishment. But the public testimony, broadcast live and viewed by tens of millions, had made it impossible to ignore. By the end of the first week, 3 former Clinton staffers who had been granted immunity during the FBI's 2016 investigation came forward with new information. Apparently, they were no longer willing to protect someone who looked increasingly likely to face criminal charges. Cheryl Mills, Clinton's former chief of staff, hired a criminal defense attorney. Huma Abedin, Clinton's longtime deputy, issued a statement saying she would cooperate fully with any investigations. Paul Cometa, the IT contractor who had used BleachBit to delete Clinton's emails, reportedly approached prosecutors about a potential cooperation deal. Democratic Party leaders began distancing themselves. Senators who had defended Clinton for years suddenly became unavailable for comment or issued carefully worded statements about supporting thorough investigations. Major donors started redirecting their contributions to other candidates and causes. The Clinton Foundation announced a restructuring. Within 2 weeks, it announced it would cease most of its operations pending a comprehensive audit requested by multiple state attorneys general. Key staff members resigned. Programs shut down. Bill Clinton canceled all upcoming public appearances. Hillary Clinton's sparse speaking schedule disappeared entirely. The Clintons retreated to their Chappaqua home, surrounded by lawyers. A month after the hearing, a federal grand jury was impaneled in Washington. D.C. witnesses began testifying. Unlike the FBI's 2016 investigation, this one showed no signs of special treatment for the powerful. Subpoenas went out to dozens of former Clinton aides. Financial records were seized. Immunity deals from the previous investigation were scrutinized for potential violations. Polling showed dramatic shifts in public opinion. A Quinnipiac poll found that 71% of Americans believed Clinton should face the same legal standards as anyone else who mishandled classified information. More surprisingly, 47% of Democrats agreed, a sign that even her own party was exhausted from defending the indefensible. Another poll asked whether Clinton had engaged in pay-to-play corruption through the Clinton Foundation. 64% of respondents said yes, including 39% of Democrats. But perhaps most significant was the broader impact on Washington's culture. Gabbard hadn't just exposed Clinton. She'd exposed a system where powerful politicians used intelligence agencies as political weapons, where foreign governments bought access through charitable donations, where classified information rules applied to everyone except the elite, where lies could be maintained for years through compliant media. The hearing became a reference point. When other politicians were accused of mishandling classified information, reporters immediately drew comparisons to the Clinton standard. When foundations associated with political figures received foreign donations, investigators scrutinized them more carefully. When intelligence agencies were accused of political bias, the Clinton investigation was cited as evidence. Tulsi Gabbard herself became a symbol. The veteran who'd been smeared as a Russian asset and had waited 5 years to methodically prove her accusers were actually guilty of what they'd accused her of. Conservative media celebrated her. Liberal outlets struggled to dismiss her since she'd been one of their own until she dared challenge the establishment. Think pieces proliferated. How Tulsi Gabbard became the unlikely hero of government accountability. The Gabbard hearing and the death of the Clinton political dynasty. What the Clinton testimony reveals about Washington's two-tiered justice system. 3 months after the hearing, the investigation continued. Multiple Clinton associates had testified before the grand jury. The Justice Department had indicated that charging decisions would be made based solely on the evidence, without regard to political considerations. Whether Clinton would ultimately face criminal charges remained uncertain. Washington had a long history of protecting its own. Powerful political figures rarely faced prosecution, regardless of the evidence against them. But something fundamental had shifted. Hillary Clinton's political career was over. Not ended by voters, though they'd rejected her in 2016. Not destroyed by Republican attacks, though those had been relentless. But ended by facts, by her own documented actions, by evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. And Tulsi Gabbard, the woman Clinton had tried to destroy with a single calculated lie in October 2019, had been the one to bring those facts into the light. When a reporter caught up with Gabbard outside the Capitol a week after the hearing, she asked if Gabbard felt vindicated. "This was never about vindication," Gabbard replied. "This was about accountability. For too long, we've had a two-tiered system of justice in this country, one for the powerful and one for everyone else. Politicians who lie to the American people, who mishandle our nation's secrets, who use their offices for personal enrichment, and who never face consequences." She looked directly into the camera. What happened in that hearing room wasn't personal. It was necessary, because no one, no matter how powerful, no matter how connected, no matter how many times they've gotten away with it before, is above the law. The American people needed to see the evidence. They needed to hear the testimony. They needed to know the truth. And now they do. As she walked away, the marble halls of the Capitol behind her seemed to echo with the weight of history. The hearing would be remembered as a turning point, the moment when carefully constructed lies finally collapsed under the weight of documented truth. The investigation continued. The evidence kept mounting. And across America, In living rooms and coffee shops and on social media platforms, millions of people were finally asking the questions that should have been asked years ago. Should Hillary Clinton face prosecution for what was revealed? Should there be consequences for weaponizing intelligence agencies against political opponents? Should foreign governments be allowed to buy access through charitable foundations? Should classified information laws apply equally to everyone, regardless of political power? The answers seemed obvious. The only question was whether Washington would finally have the courage to act on them. Tulsi Gabbard had done her part. She'd presented the evidence, asked the questions, and forced the confrontation that the establishment had avoided for years. What happened next would reveal whether America truly believed in equal justice under law, or whether that was just a phrase carved into marble buildings where the powerful protected their own. The marble halls remembered everything, and eventually everything comes to light. What do you think? Should Hillary Clinton face prosecution for what was revealed in this hearing? Should there be real consequences for those who abuse power, who lie to the American people, who treat public service as an opportunity for personal enrichment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe this story needs to be heard by more people, if you think accountability matters more than political connections, share this video. Because the only way we restore faith in our institutions is by proving that no one is above the law. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that expose what the establishment doesn't want you to know, because the truth matters, facts matter, and justice, no matter how long delayed, must ultimately prevail. The hearing ended, but the reckoning had only just begun.